What's up, y'all? In honor of Father's Day, my dad is here to recommend his favorite books of all time. The first book we are going to be talking about is one I personally disagree with, and that is The Spite House. My father loves this book simply because it is a horror novel that follows a father on the run with his two girls and the sacrifices that he must make in order to protect them and their financial future, all the while combating toxic lessons that he has been taught and combating very real supernatural forces that live in this house they've escaped to. I had issues with this book simply because I could not suspend my disbelief for some of the father's actions, although it did make his character feel more real. A lot of the things that the father did in this book are definitely things I could see my father doing, but unlike my father, this one in the book actually sticks around to take care of his kids. I really love books where a single parent is on the run with their children. It is a trope that I really love because it is that parent-child against the world kind of thing, and I've always really appreciated that, probably because I have never experienced that kind of loyalty from my dad. Next up, my father is going to recommend Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and this is actually one of my favorite books. But this is a book that he personally connects to because Hamnet's father also really struggled to be loyal, faithful, and present for his family. Now, the reason that I personally love Hamnet is because this is a Shakespeare-based novel that is following a boy named Hamnet and his twin sister as they are navigating the plague in, like, the Black Plague in the 1500s. It is a story not only of the twins, but of their parents, the relationship between the mom and her damn near twin brother, and just the history of this family and the dynamics between them. It is so quiet but forceful. It will make you cry. The writing is unfucking matched. There's so much heart and soul within this book. It's the kind of book that you're gonna want to restart the second you finish it, the kind of book that you're going to want to annotate to high hell. I would go to hell and back for this book the way that my father would never go to hell and back for me. Now, my dad's next recommendation is going to be Burn Down, Rise Up by Vincent Terrado. This is a book that he and I actually really agree on because it is a YA horror book that is like no other. It is set in the Bronx, which is where my family is from, and focuses largely on the Bronx burnings in the 80s and the fallout of that. But at its core, it is a story of a group of teenagers who are fighting to save themselves and their city from a supernatural threat that they basically bring upon themselves by playing this creepy ass game in the subway and letting these demonic creepy ass creatures loose. Now, one of my favorite things about this book, and something that my father also really loved, was the relationship between the father and our protagonist. I loved getting to see an Afro-Latine man sharing his Afro-Latine spirituality with his daughter. That was a beautiful thing to see, and it was also deliciously queer, so touchingly sapphic. When I finished this book, my father asked why a girl would bother to be queer, and I asked him why he uses the same product for his body, face, and hair. He couldn't answer that question. He's also going to recommend The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This is a 5-star Victor LaValle book. As y'all know, he's like my favorite horror author. I love him so fucking much, but I did not love The Changeling as much as I wanted to, probably because I didn't understand it the way that I didn't understand my father's decision to abandon us. In The Changeling, we follow a man named Apollo who was devastated after his father disappeared and left nothing more than a box of books. Leaving behind a box of books was the very least you could have done. He meets this woman named Emma. They settle into their new life and have a child, but then Emma commits a despicable act and disappears, leaving Apollo on a quest to recover his wife and child that takes him through a graveyard full of secrets, a creepy ass island, and more. There is an incredible blend of supernatural and non-supernatural horror and amazing themes about fatherhood. Again, one of my favorite tropes in literature is seeing parents of any gender go through hell and back for their kids. It's one of the reasons why I love After the Flood so deeply much, because it is all about a mother who during the apocalypse is going through hell to get one of her children back that was taken from her. And The Changeling is really similar, especially for those of you who enjoy Changeling lore. I think that this is going to be an incredible book for you. He also is going to recommend The Ballad of Black Tom, which was the first work that I read by Victor Laval, and I loved it so much. I love it to this day. I'm obsessed with this new edition that the publisher released. I think it's freaking incredible. It is a book that you can read in one sitting, and it is full of horror, both supernatural and non-supernatural. In The Ballad of Black Tom, we are following a man named Tom who is essentially, I think the word is a soothsayer. He is kind of a bit of an alley cat. He likes to play music, he likes to hustle, and he is determined to be financially successful and move out of the ghetto. This is set in, I believe, the 30s or 40s New York City, and he meets this wealthy white man who invites him to come and play music at his mansion. And the father of Tom is like, yo, don't go to this white man's mansion. And it's about how Tom ends up going to the mansion. She's barking at you because she's never seen you before. The importance of Tom's father weighs heavily on this book and is a big influence in his character, and the relationship between father and son meant so much to me while reading this book. It is one of the most tender aspects of this book, but it is one that is going to creep you out so deeply. It's perfect for fans of Lovecraft's works, and this is a book that not only recognizes Lovecraft's achievements to the horror genre, but also criticizes Lovecraft for being a pretty despicable human being at the same time. Next up, we have You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a book that is so beloved. It is Akwaeke Emezi's first romance, and we were all highly, highly anticipating it. But the reason that I'm going to be recommending this book is not for the reason that you likely will hear it recommended by other booktubers. This book is often applauded for its amazing female Black messiness, Black female friendships, the celebration of Black artistry and joy, for its food romance, and for the very controversial romance as well. But the reason that this book is going to be recommended in this video is because of Alim. Alim basically, and this is not a spoiler, he is the love interest of Fei, who essentially falls in love with her potential love interest's father. Alim is an incredible Black queer man who is embracing his gender fluidity, his bisexuality, who essentially has to navigate the sacrifices that adults must make for their children while also honoring themselves and still taking care of themselves as human beings. When you read the book, it will make a lot more sense, but I think Alim is an incredible father, not just because he was there for his children and made sacrifices for them, but because he put down boundaries for himself as a father and a man. And I thought that that was really healthy and beautiful to see. I love the kind of parent that he is, and I really think that this book should be applauded a hell of a lot more for the depiction of Black fatherhood, especially Black queer fatherhood. Next book recommendation is going to be High Risk Homosexual by Edgar Gomez. This is a queer Latina memoir from a man who is coming of age. He speaks a great deal about the role that toxic masculinity and compulsory heterosexuality had on his life, and he is unpacking that, the way that his father enforced heterosexuality upon him and his own idea of masculinity. It is also about the joy of queer spaces and the joy of claiming your own identity as a man and being worthy of love and happiness and self-appreciation. Next up, my father would like to recommend Bram Stoker's Dracula, because just like Dracula, he also failed to support his children. Next up, he's going to recommend these two books, which elegantly demonstrate the ways that a father can impact his son's life. And those books are The Shadow of the Wind and A Hero Born. Now, A Shadow of the Wind is not really known for its depiction of fatherhood, but I think it absolutely I think that it absolutely should be, because this is a modern literary classic about a boy who loves books. His father runs a bookstore. It is set in, I believe, 1940s Barcelona, and it's about this boy coming of age, falling in love with words, falling in love with a woman, and also trying to figure out why this book that he fell in love with is being systematically eradicated from the literary world. All of the copies are being burned, and so there's a really good mystery added as well. But one of the things that I love about this book is the way that it shows how close the father and son are, and the ways that hobbies can be passed down, things like loving books and the way that that can be passed down to our children. The resiliency of the main character as a result of the nurturing and love of his father, the quiet beauty of their relationship. I just simply loved this book for that reason, and I wish it was applauded for the parent-child relationship and the presence of his father in his life a lot more. The other book that we are going to recommend is A Hero Born. This is by Jin Young, and it is book 1 in Legends of the Condor Heroes. Now, for those of you who are trying to read more translated works, this is going to be a great fantasy to start with. The book begins with the death of his father, who was a Song patriot, and how the son and mother must flee the empire, and the son must train in order to face his mortal enemy and embrace his destiny. It is an incredible story about love and war, but also about betrayal, which my father knows a great deal about. Next up, we are going to be recommending another supernatural horror, and that is going to be Infested. This is an amazing YA horror book that is following a teen who has just moved from Texas to the Bronx. And again, my family is from the Bronx. The Bronx is where my parents met and fell in love. And horror books, thrillers, just really any books set in the Bronx, but especially ones that have a social horror component, are very, very near and dear to my heart. And it is about gentrification, about whitewashing of our neighborhoods, and it's like following this kid who has a stepfather. He buys this condo and is renovating it, and the kid, whose name is Manny, starts to feel creatures crawling under his skin. That kind of thing. It also incorporates the Bronx burnings into the storyline, and I say this every time I bring up the Bronx burnings, but if you're not familiar with that very important part of recent history, please educate yourselves on that, because it has had very real effects. My mother is actually a survival of the Bronx burnings, and there's just so many ways that it continues to impact Bronx residents to this very day. But a good reason to read this book is not only its conversations about gentrification, but also of toxic masculinity and working through that as a young boy. There's also a stepdad, stepchild parent relationship in this book, which is important because family doesn't always come in blood form. That is so important to acknowledge as well. Then we hit The Lingering by S.J. Holiday. One of the best things about this book is that it's blurbed as Stephen King meets Thomas Harris, which I think is a pretty accurate representation, even though y'all know I'm not a Stephen King fan, but I am a big Thomas Harris fan. And this is a supernatural horror thriller about a mysterious couple who moves into this commune that used to be a psychiatric facility. But the couple is not what they seem, and people start disappearing, and shit gets real from there. Now, my father likes this book specifically for the title, as he left our family with nothing but ghosts. He's also going to be recommending Punch Me Up to the Gods and Don't Cry for Me. Y'all have to be brand new to not know about Punch Me Up to the Gods, because I talk about this book all of the time. This is potentially the best memoir I've ever read in my life, like top 5 easily, and it is from a Black queer man who is speaking about his queerness, his masculinity, in just the most heart-wrenching way possible. And the chapters are broken up by letters that he is writing to this Black, potentially queer boy that he sees on the bus, who's being very aggressively handled by his father, and he is kind of using these letters that he's writing to this little boy as foreshadowing for what he sees in this child's future if the child is unable to work through the inevitable toxic masculinity that he's going to develop as a result of this exposure, and the things that he wants for this kid, and the importance of showing up for your little boy. I loved this book. It hits so hard. Just talking about it makes me really fucking emotional, and each of the chapters, or sections of the book rather, are based off of parts of Gwendolyn Brooks's We Real Cool, which is one of the best poems that have ever been written. I think Gwendolyn Brooks's We Real Cool was the first time a Black female won a Pulitzer for her poetry. Correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it was. He also wants to recommend Don't Cry for Me, because this is a book about a Black father who is writing letters to his adult gay son that he's estranged from. And I think the adult gay son is dead, or they've just been estranged. And the reason for the estrangement is because the son is gay. And this is also semi-autobiographical. The audiobook is read by the author and you really feel it. It is precious and important and tender. And I personally prefer to have books where the fathers are just there from the beginning. This is a really good book recommendation for parents that are still struggling to rectify their child's queerness, especially as it intersects with blackness. And that is another reason why my father is also going to be recommending Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, because that book is all about two fathers who didn't support their gay kids when they were alive, getting justice for the murders of their children who were married to each other as well. So they're working through their homophobia while also trying to get justice for their children. And again, it's this trope of, I'm gonna care for you after the fact. I'm gonna protect your black queer life now that you're gone, which is a narrative that doesn't really serve me. But I recognize that there are adults who will connect with that narrative and need it. And so that's the reason why he is going to recommend this book. And I'm not gonna lie, I love Razorblade Tears. I fucking adore that book. Another amazing black queer work that my father is going to be recommending is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This book isn't often spoken about for its themes of fatherhood. However, it was one of the most important aspects of this book for me personally. It was part of why I fell in love with this book, is because of the relationship between Shafa and Essen. Nasun is the child. And that found father, that found family relationship between the two of them really, really made the book. It made me feel closer to her characters. This is a black apocalyptic trilogy that you've likely heard about. It's about a black mother going on a mission to recover her child who was taken from her and get justice for the child that was murdered. And in some ways you can interpret being an origin as a metaphor for not just blackness but also queerness. And so to see those themes, you really have to read between the lines, but they are absolutely there. And I think that it is an amazing recommendation for Father's Day. I got tired of putting my arm around him the same way he got tired of paying child support. Next book that he's going to recommend is Rainbow Milk. This is another amazing black queer, it's Jamaican, British book about a black man who is basically excommunicated from his church for being queer. He's a black boy and he gets kicked out and ends up becoming a sex worker and goes through a slew of drug use, toxic relationships, trying to find himself, trying to find joy. The themes of fatherhood are subtle within this text, but they are absolutely there. He has a very tough relationship with his stepdad, and also you are getting to see the impact of his birth father on his life throughout the pages, and I can't speak on how that happens without ruining anything. It is raunchy, it is gritty, it is unapologetic, and I don't think that you should miss this book. It is very underappreciated, but heavy in the trauma, so do look up content warning. The final book that I'm going to be speaking about in this video is Trust Kids, Stories on Youth Autonomy and Confronting Adult Supremacy. And this is something that I would ask all parents to read, and a text that should be very accessible to children, because ideas of child rights and child justice and child autonomy, while they've been around for a long time, I think that they're just now coming into public consciousness, and the ways that kids know who they are. The way that kids are often forced into hierarchies that do not serve them and do not help them grow up into adults who are comfortable claiming themselves and setting boundaries, that sort of thing. It's not a long book, but I haven't read it and I'm so freaking excited to read it. It's about declaring how kids should be liberated, listening to youth, and questioning adult supremacy on every page. At the heart of the book are conversations about all the ways that children can be included, loved, and cared for in a more generative, just, and egalitarian way. It explores the liberatory potential of consent and autonomy in relationships among children, youth, and the adults in their lives. They also trace how oppressive attitudes toward children, far from being natural forms of kinship with the youngest members of our families and communities, have identifiable social and historical roots. And of course, this has major implications for queer children, for trans children, for disabled children, etc. So these are all the books that my father is going to recommend in this video. Almost all of these books are by queer authors and or have queer trans representation, so definitely pick them up. To anybody and everybody watching this who has ever dealt with parental abandonment, please know that it has nothing to do with you and that you have and always will be deserving of love. Check out my Patreon if you want more exclusive content from me. If you want to stalk me on Instagram, that is down below. There's a bunch of links in my description of recent popular videos I've done, all of that fun stuff. For my patrons, this month in June, I am filming a video where I talk about queer books that make me feel seen, that made me feel seen. For our live movie party, we're going to be watching Stand Out, which is a queer celebration. It's basically stand up from queer people, and we're gonna be watching it live together. I'm so excited about that. And the book that we're reading is Open Throat by Henry Hoke. The story about this non-binary lion who is navigating the disappearance of their natural habitat in LA. It's super weird and super cool, and that is what's going on the Patreon right now. I'm so glad I got to introduce all of you to my father.